woke up to. So what's the story there?
So the crew's basically been in cryosleep for 28 years. And
That's a long time.
And a long time. And they wake up at this Forerunner artifact called the Ark, really clueless as to what is going on, right? They've really been out of it for so long, to the point where this game takes place shortly after Halo 5. So we're starting to, kind of bring those universes together. And as you said, they run into the lovable Atriox, who, basically has his way with them. And now, you're going for a little bit of payback.
So this is your crew that you had in Cryo, right?
Yeah, so you've got a bunch of people in the crew. We're introducing some new characters, some new AI as well.
Do you start out with just whatever is given to you, and then you can kind of build them up from there?
Exactly. Yeah, what's really interesting about it is the Spirit of Fire. The ship is somewhat limited at the beginning, so that kind of limits the units you can take into battle. So in this case, Kevin's just starting to do his foray, but because the Spirit of Fire is still overhead, it is able to give him some support and some additional units to help back him up. Like, for example, you're going to see some tanks coming in. Now, one of the things we talk about a lot is we're trying to, I talk about this being an action RTS.
Yeah.
And people ask me a lot, what does that mean? And, it basically means a lot of stuff like this. A lot of big explosions, a lot of really cool firepower. Really, giving you that sentiment that, I have this massive army at my control.
Yeah.
And I can do anything I want with it. The other thing we try to do is just make it accessible. It's kind of interesting. You said you played on a lot of RTS and you as well. So to us, it feels normal. It feels natural. It's not that scary. But it can be an intimidating genre to people who have never jumped in
Yeah,
before,
I could
right?
see that for sure.
I always argue I think MOBAs have trained people a little better than they realize for some of the management. But we're doing a lot to try to make it accessible. So, you can see a lot of tracer fire, so it's really obvious where you're shooting, who's shooting at you. And in multiplayer in particular, in our modes in particular, we've got a gambit of modes. You've got really, really hardcore modes that you would expect, and then much more accessible, quick to jump in, right?
Gotcha.
So if you think of, what do you have to do in an RTS? You need to build a base, you need to collect resources, you got to manage your trees and your evolution.
So in this case, you're not building a base, right? You're just...
Yeah, you're in campaign right now. This is kind of served to teach you how to do it. So yeah, for example, right now Kevin's just running amok with these characters, but eventually in this mission, he will get to a point where he starts to build a base and all of that great stuff.
So this is a good way to introduce someone to the units they're going to be using and the methods that they're going to be using in the game.
Exactly. Yeah,
Awesome.
You can kind of figure out what units you like, how they work against other units, what some of their strengths and weaknesses are. And really what we're doing with this first level is starting you with a bunch of units and, kind of breadcrumbing you through it. So Kevin, as he runs across the bridge here, is going to run into some a little harsher opposition. And, it starts to show off that, rock, paper, scissors nature of RTS, right?
And then during this process, are you using some of these resources to spawn some of the other creature or units?
Yes, coming down, so when Kevin moves past this, he's actually going to take an enemy base, and that's going to allow him to build his own.
Okay.
And once he builds his own base, he's going to be able to upgrade his units, create some more units, things like that.
What are some of the units we've already seen here that people might want to identify and learn about?
So you can see, right now he's using his flame units. Those are probably one of my favorite ones. I think those guys are just fantastic. And they're upgradable as well. So as Kevin starts to, create his base and upgrade them, you'll see those flames, the range is wider.
Great.
They do a lot more damage. He's got his standard Marines there as well, and of course backed up by the tanks. So you can see what Kevin's doing is he's kind of keeping his infantry a little bit ahead of his tanks, because on the Banished side, the enemy that he's attacking right now, there were some anti-vehicle units that are going to try to get to the tank. So Kevin is obviously not his first time playing this.
I would hope not.
He's kind of keeping that buffer between it to kind of keep his tanks in the game.
You mentioned this feeling of action RTS and kind of the explosions, and I definitely see the way the particles are moving. There's a realness, almost like a fantastical realness to it. And I noticed that can actually cloud visibility. Is that kind of part of your strategy in the game then?
No, as much that is something. You hit the nail on the head of one of the challenges of all of this, right? You get a lot of smokes and explosion and fire. We're obviously still in development, so this is an older build. These are things we're still playing with.
Oh, I see.
But obviously the goal for us is that we obscure your vision as little as possible. possible.
Oh, okay.
In the course of making.
I mean, it
all of
looks
these
really
things
cool.
blow up. Yeah, it's like I love the explosions. There's
Right.
this like intense feeling of action, kind of breaking the impression that people not familiar with the genre when they
Yeah.
think of RTS, they
Totally.
think slow. Not a lot of an action and excitement.
So you're trying to make killing faster and the pace of the gameplay a little bit
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Exactly right. And some of these other modes we talked about, it will be even faster. So if you think of multiplayer, you could have a classic deathmatch mode that could take 2 or 3 hours, but we've got modes that you can play in as little as 5 or 6 minutes.
And are those primarily PvE or those are also PvP?
Combination, yeah. So you can play PvP, and all of our modes are going to have skirmish modes as well. So if you wanted to, if we wanted to play together against the AI, we could.
Oh, nice. So you can team up.
and that takes some of the edge off of it.
So you're not battling your friends, you can play with them.
Exactly.
Nice.
That's another accessibility feature, I would guess.
Precisely. I mean, a lot of the times, any game really, right? That notion of going online and playing against other human beings who can perhaps not always be as gentle as we might like, it can be intimidating for people, right? So
Right.
it's just a lot more.
And so what's this UI that just popped up here?
Are those your med drones? Yeah, so right now Kevin's using Captain Cutter, so is one of the leaders, and all of the leaders have certain special abilities.
Okay.
So in this case, what Kevin's using are med drones. So as you can see, it drops a bubble, and all of the units that run into that, for as long as the bubble is up, will heal.
Okay.
And get better.
That's what
So
it looked like.
It's like another meta point of the gameplay. So when you're in multiplayer, like throughout the course of the campaign, you're going to get exposed to these leaders, and you'll see the different abilities they
Are
have.
there counter abilities to the leaders? So like he puts that down, is there a way to like counter that or?
Different leaders are basically going to be different focus. So in the case of, some of the leaders might be a little more like Healy based like this, right? So he's going to drop a med drone. Atriox, who's a little more aggressive, you're just going to drop these beams from the sky and just kind of like tear up your group. And they're all very short-term effects, but if you use them strategically,
Yeah.
it can be quite effective.
I'm more aggressive. I just want to kill everything.
I was curious, we talked about StarCraft. We have a deep love for RTS. So what are people going to find in this that they might find familiar if they're fond of RTSs, and what might they find that's new and kind of the signature of Halo Wars 2?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think what you're going to find familiar, if you're familiar with the genre, you're going to see a lot of those covenants that you're used to. So, rock, paper, scissors nature of gameplay, right? Like some units are better against other, they're weaker against other. The notion that in the core game that you need to build a base, you need to collect resources, you can create your own strategies. And it's worth mentioning, our development partner for this is Creative Assembly out of the UK, from Total War. They've been doing that for like
Great.
2 decades now or something
Yeah.
like that. So they have a really impressive, really solid RTS pedigree. I think what's unique about this as an RTS, as you hit on earlier, is just that very, very quick to action, very, very accessible. And one of the modes, which I can only tease for the time being, is actually a completely new way to play an RTS. It really takes standard RTS gameplay and turns it on its head.
Interesting.
And that's that mode I talked about that can be played in a much shorter time frame as well, like 5, 6, 7 minutes.
That is quite a tease.
Yeah, I was actually going
And
to
I'm
follow
like,
up with the
tell me.
question because you've been talking about the modes. Like, what modes can you talk about that are new?
Sure. So I mean, we've obviously got the basic deathmatch mode. We've got Strongholds, which is another faster mode that's actually on the show floor here, where it's about capturing bases. So how many bases can you and your teammates catch as you move down? So again, you try to mix up those objectives a little bit. So it's not always about, well, I win by destroying you. So if you have players who maybe aren't that aggressive or don't like that kind of gameplay, we have domination modes where it's about capturing and holding points for the longest period of time. So all of the modes are built on the same fundamentals, but they're different in terms of what your objectives are, what elements are present. In some cases, you don't need to collect resources. You start with a lot of units, things like that. So a lot of different ways to play.
That's nice. So you're catering to kind of like either like the people who want to hop in and do a quick match versus someone who wants to sit down and have like an actual gameplay session for longer.
Exactly. Yeah, and at the same time, that actually hopefully helps us onboard new people to the genre. Because I mean,
Totally.
like in the case of you two, familiar with RTS, you could just hop in and go.
Yeah.
But if someone's never played it before, these modes are going to serve as a great onboarding. I talk about it a lot as a continuum, right? Like if this is our hardcore deathmatch and this is this new secret-y mode we're calling Blitz, as you move this way, we take out some of those elements. So if you've never played before, you might say, oh, I'm going to start here where I can just get in and go, and maybe, you work your way back up.
Totally. Well, where can people go to learn